Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating, sweeping framework. We're going to dive into the work of Professor Jiang Shaiqin, who presents a highly provocative theory on the evolution of warfare, the birth of the nation-state, and why he argues the world is currently on a trajectory toward a massive global reset. It's a really compelling lens through which to view current events, so let's jump right in.
Okay, here's our roadmap. We'll be covering 1. The evolution of warfare. 2. The birth of the nation-state. 3. Blood and nationalism. 4. The American wealth game. And finally, resetting the global game.
Starting off with Section 1, the evolution of warfare, shifting the target. So the professor roots his theory in conflicts like the modern US-Iran tension, pointing out that the actual mechanics of war have fundamentally changed. Hundreds of years ago, the logic of war was pretty simple, right? You meet on a battlefield, you destroy the enemy's soldiers, and whoever wins that battle wins the war. But fast forward to the 20th century. Nation-states had grown massive populations, which meant they could just constantly replenish their armies. Because of that, the target shifted. In conflicts like World War II, the goal became destroying the state's capacity to manufacture, which unfortunately meant targeting civilians. Now, consider the 21st century. The professor points out that today we have nuclear weapons, and global populations are absolutely enormous. Direct, total war risks absolute nuclear annihilation. So, modern warfare shifts yet again. Today, the goal is economic sabotage and strangulation. It's about sowing discord to essentially turn a population against its own government.
That brings us to Section 2, Birth of the Nation-State, the Software of Society.
To really understand these shifts in warfare, we have to look at the root cause. 8 billion. That is our staggering global population today. Now, we often credit the scientific revolution or the invention of modern agricultural fertilizers for this massive boom. But Professor Jiang argues something different. He says that while science definitely played a role, the real catalyst was a revolution in politics. Specifically, the creation of the modern nation-state.
To understand this political software, we have to look at the main architect of the French Revolution's underlying philosophy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's the guy who developed the social contract theory. Before Rousseau, you were just born into a community and followed custom. That was it. But Rousseau asked, since we are born naturally free, why on earth would we surrender that freedom to a state? His answer was that we join society to become even more free collectively, creating something he called the general will. Now, it's absolutely crucial to distinguish this from simple majority rules democracy. Say you have 3 people voting on whether to eat at McDonald's or Pizza Hut, and 2 vote Pizza Hut. That's simple democracy. But the general will isn't just about what the majority wants in the moment. It's about striving for the highest ideal of who the people could actually be.
So, how do we reach this ideal? Well, the professor points to Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, which breaks down into 3 simple steps. First up, universality. Imagine every action you take is reflected across the entire universe. If you smile, everyone smiles. If you get angry, everyone gets angry. Basically, you must act in a way that creates the exact society you want to live in. Second, free will. You cannot be forced to smile. It has to be a free choice. And third, human as an end, meaning you can never sacrifice a human being merely as a tool to build a better society. According to Rousseau's followers, these principles form the highest moral law. From this sovereign ideal, you build a government, laws, and an education system that molds individuals into true citizens.
Now, the crucial point here is a stark contrast. When the French Revolution kicked off, European monarchs looked at this social contract and saw a direct threat to their royal authority, so they invaded France. But a very strange thing happened. The monarchs sent professional mercenary armies. Mercenaries fight for a paycheck, right? Their goal is to intimidate, not to die. But on the other side, you had the French Republic. These were everyday citizens with practically no formal military training, but they were fueled by this powerful new social contract. They were fighting for an ideal, and they were perfectly willing to die for it. This immense ideological power allowed citizen armies to easily overwhelm paid mercenaries, giving rise to the unstoppable French Empire.
Moving on to Section 3, Blood, Iron, and Nationalism, the German model.
So, that French dominance had an unintended consequence. Defeated European nations quickly realized they needed their own unifying theory if they were going to compete. What emerged was a new model, famously known as the German model, or Iron and Blood. This new theory explicitly rejected Rousseau's lofty philosophical social contract. Instead, it built the concept of the nation entirely around shared language, culture, and race. This was literally the birth of modern nationalism as we often recognize it today. Suddenly, you had competing theories in Europe, but both had successfully unlocked the power to call upon millions of everyday citizens to fight and die for the state.
This birthed an incredibly dark and deadly cycle. States figured out that population size equaled military power, so they focused on growing their populations as fast as possible. But larger populations just led to larger, much deadlier wars. This hyper-competitive, militarized growth cycle kept spinning for over a century, ultimately culminating in the absolute devastation of Europe in World War II. The continent simply exhausted itself, and its civilizations were brought to the brink of ruin.
Which leads us to Section 4, the American Wealth Game, gamifying the state.
With Europe physically and spiritually exhausted after World War II, a massive power vacuum opened up. Enter the American model. According to the professor's analysis, America operates on a wholly different theory. Because it was essentially a multicultural nation of immigrants colonizing a vast continent, it didn't rely on those French philosophical ideals, and it didn't rely on German racial nationalism. Instead, it turned the nation-state into a game. The Constitution and the government act as the game masters, and the rules, they're pretty simple. Anyone can come, play the game, work hard, and get rich. It's a system entirely based on wealth accumulation. And crucially, adding more players, more immigrants, only increases the overall wealth and power of the nation.
So, let's summarize the evolution of these three distinct systems real quick. We have the French model, driven by the social contract and collective ideals. We have the German model, driven by iron, blood, and cultural nationalism. And finally, the American model, driven by wealth, open participation, and the game. After World War II, America began spreading this wealth game globally. And once the Soviet Union collapsed, removing the last major alternative system, the American game truly conquered the world through what we now call globalization.
Finally, Section 5, resetting the global game, the stalled board.
So, here we are in the present day. What happens when this global game stops working for the vast majority of players? The professor points out a critical structural flaw in this wealth accumulation game. If you let the game run long enough, it mathematically results in massive inequality. We end up with a reality where a very small handful of players achieve tremendous, almost unimaginable wealth, while almost everyone else, the majority of that booming 8 billion population we talked about earlier, falls deeply into debt. Within the pure logic of the game, those burdened by debt and unable to accumulate wealth are rendered effectively obsolete to the system's continued growth.
I really want you to pause and think about this next question. When a system reaches a point where the board is totally stalled, where the mechanics of the wealth game only serve a tiny fraction of the players and the rest are trapped, how do you actually reset the game?
Well, according to Professor Zhang's theory, the answer is incredibly dark. He argues that to reset the game, you must fundamentally destroy the game in the first place. His thesis is that the current global trajectory of massive populations, extreme inequality, and systemic gridlock inherently points toward a devastating World War III. A war meant to burn the current global system to the ground, essentially clearing the board to start the game all over again. It is a highly alarming, deeply provocative conclusion, for sure, but it's one that challenges us to look closely at the underlying software of our modern world. Think about that the next time you're scrolling through the news. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.